Thank you so much, Peter. That was a wonderful way to bring this meeting to an end with so many thoughts for the future of our botanical institutions and how we can remain relevant and hopefully grow in our relevance to, let's say, people and the planet, reflecting our sponsors for this meeting, Plants, People, Planet, an important new journal that I'm associated with. Peter, I loved your 6 recommendations for the future. Relevance of botanic gardens, etc. We had some talks this afternoon about projects that have created new botanic gardens in various parts of the world. Having created one to some extent myself at Bristol, with a lot of your input into the philosophy behind that. If you were giving advice to anyone creating a new botanic garden today, what key piece of advice would you give them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the most obvious, the most common mistake, let's put it this way, the thing to avoid is spending a lot of money on capital and then not having the ongoing annual support to be able to sustain the program. We saw that, I think, in the UK with many of the projects that were funded by the Millennium Commission, where enormous investment was made in a capital facility, but then the projections of visitor revenue and other revenue didn't work out. So I think that the most obvious mistake to make is to put a lot of money into capital, but not have a sustainable financial model going forward. And that's just a waste of time and a waste of money. So I think that that is kind of the most obvious point. I think that, you know, I mentioned in the talk that, that the key thing about institutions is sort of history, governance, and money. So I think, you know, figuring out who is really in charge, who is really calling the shots, and trying to figure out how to position the garden in a way that's favorable, viewed favorably by the people who are kind of in control. So it's a kind of a political, almost tactical view. But I think unless you do that, again, you run the risk of the whole enterprise running into the sand. So all of those things are not so much about plants, but they are kind of really kind of important, fundamental things that I think are really important to bear in mind at the outset. You can run in many directions when you are the first runner in the relay race, but you want to make sure that you're heading in a direction that's amenable to the people who actually are in control, your board or the government or whoever that happens to be.
Thank you. That's great food for thought, especially for us as we embark on quite a hopefully monumental capital project, but we will ensure that we have the wherewithal and the money to back all that up for the future. There are a number of questions coming in, Peter. The first one that came in was, as you were talking about the sort of restoration project that you're doing at Oak Spring with the native floral landscape, and it's quite a sort of practical question. I don't know whether you have an equivalent of yellow rattle in Virginia to control the grasses, but this question has asked that. Are you integrating North American equivalent of yellow rattle for the renewed landscape?
Actually, we have thought about doing that. We haven't actually done it yet, but we have thought about doing it, and we have identified the species. Now, I can't remember which genus it is. There are a couple of species that are native that we could use in that way. I will say that this is kind of one of the more daunting challenges that we have. We have 700 acres of what was basically old horse pasture. And those plants are quite familiar to me. All of those temperate grasses that we have growing in Britain are the ones that are out on this landscape. And the question is, how do we move that to something that's got higher diversity and supports a broader range of biodiversity? But what I've learned is that this is a very kind of complicated business, particularly if you don't want to have a large-scale application of herbicides. I mean, the standard process around here is 3 applications of Roundup, incessant applications of Roundup, which is not something that we've been prepared to do. But if you don't do that, it's going to take longer. It's going to take more time. And I think we're still sort of figuring out, in fact, we have a sort of large-scale experiment going on how you can manipulate this with mowing and burning, which are 2 kind of key management tools that are available to use. So I would say that our success with that at the moment is quite mixed. And I would also say that one also needs to be a little cautious. For example, we've changed the mowing regimes to favor the birds. So we don't mow after about March, and we don't mow again until September, after the birds have finished their breeding. And even with the European pasture grasses, we have wonderful populations of some birds that are endangered or with very low populations nationally. So we, in striving to produce a landscape that's more botanically diverse, we also want to be careful that we don't create conditions that are problematic for some of the birds who are obviously using this landscape quite well. I think from our point of view, with 700 acres, we can develop a pretty good patchwork. And that, I think, will be the key, is doing this gradually, a little bit at a time, and making sure that we've got a good mosaic of habitats available.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. And in our small way, we're trying to do something similar out at the Harcourt Arboretum with our native wildflower meadow, which has really bumped up the biodiversity, particularly amongst invertebrates, and the effect, you pointed out, is dramatic to bring back these landscapes, and others were mentioning that in the previous session with Paul Smith. So really important stuff if we've got the space, as was pointed out, because we're a very small botanic garden in the centre of Oxford, just 8 acres, but we do have this wonderful 130-acre arboretum and associated landscape there, where we can do more of the practical restoration and conservation work. So that's certainly something we'll be focusing on for the next few years, certainly. Questions coming in, one relating to the Millennium Seed Bank. Peter, what were the challenges of starting that up, creating it, delivering it, and then getting it going?
Oh, well, we have so many stories, but I think the most important and potential and the thing which could have killed the project was negotiating the access and benefit sharing agreements with the various countries. That was absolutely central, absolutely key. And if that hadn't been done and done well, the project would have foundered. Then if once that was possible, we had a pretty rigorous system with the Millennium Commission. I mean, they monitored us every year. We had to report on what we'd done. So keeping our targets moving in the right direction. I mean, it was, some of us in this world are not used to working against specific numerical targets. And we were held to pretty tight, significant numerical targets. So that was always a concern. But, we had a tremendous team, and Roger Smith, who started, and then Paul Smith, who took over from Roger, did a great job with a wonderful team. And it could have been very difficult, but they made it look easy. I'm sure there was a lot of paddling going on under the water, but they did an amazing job.
Thank you. And it's going from strength to strength. So that's a wonderful achievement in your time at Kew. The next question relates to another key point that you've made in your recommendations for the future, and it's really something we're all thinking about at the moment. How can we make botanic gardens more inclusive places? I mean, perhaps from your experience in the UK, you could give us some advice.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know about the UK situation, but I do know that every botanical garden and every institution that I talk to is kind of thinking about this issue right now. And you know, I think they're not easy to solve, frankly. But I mean, certainly at Yale, a kind of fundamental problem in the school was that we had a very diverse group of students. We didn't have a diverse. That's kind of in the kind of academic context. That was part of it. So even in our current situation here in Oak Spring, in rural Virginia, we have some diversity on the staff, but not as much as we should. And I think we're doing a little better on our fellowships and our residencies because we have a large number of applications, and we can try to get the cohorts as diverse as possible. But you know, there's just a lot of work to do on this. And but I think the key thing is that people feel comfortable when they come to an institution, and part of feeling comfortable is not feeling like an outsider, feeling like they have people inside the institution who they can relate to and connect to. So that's a challenge for us all, and I think it's going to take a long time. We have a particularly interesting and fascinating situation because, as I sort of mentioned, there was obviously a major African-American presence on the land who were the slaves prior to the Civil War. And so learning more about their history on the land is one way that we can kind of acknowledge that. Although so it's very interesting now, it's really a different demographic that is struggling in our neighborhood. We are surrounded by extremely wealthy people, but we're also surrounded by people who are by no means as wealthy. They're largely from the Latinx community. And so we have another issue of how do we reach out to those populations. And so, yeah, we probably need somebody who's speaking Spanish and who can relate to them in a way that we can't right now. So there's plenty of work to do, and it's not going to be solved in a year or two.
No, that's certainly right, and it relates very much to your point about being relevant to people that and people that don't necessarily at the moment think that a botanic garden or similar spaces is for them. I mean, this is one of the challenges for us. We sit very close to a very ethnically diverse part of Oxford, the Cowley Road. You walk up there, you see people from all nations, all creeds and colours, and yet we don't see that nearby demographic represented in the Botanic Garden. It's really, that's one of our big challenges, and we have got to do that. And maybe it's plants can do that, because you walk up the street and you see see all these wonderful plants and produce for sale. And it's that relevance with plants, as you were saying about the cultivation of the plants by the enslaved people in Virginia. I think we've got a challenge there. You're right.
I think you see
we have to become more relevant to diverse demographics.
You're seeing that at the New York Botanical Garden in their Humanities Institute, which is now kind of moving into a kind of foodways, and through food and through the different plants, starting to connect with the many different cultures that are part of the boroughs of New York City. So I think useful plants for food, plants that people use is kind of one of the ways in. But you know, helping on community gardens, those are also kind of important possibilities.
Yeah, I think the food is one of the key ones, because that's all about sharing, isn't it? And people like sharing food wherever they are in the world, and that's certainly something we would have done this summer as part of our celebrations for the 400th. But that activity, our sort of festival of food from plants from different parts of the world, will have to wait till next July, as of many of our celebrations, because of the pandemic. I've got a very interesting question here from Suzanne Renner, Peter. This is relating to your restoration project. Any thoughts about rewilding, i.e. introduction of big native mammals feeding on it? I thought you'd like that.
Well, I don't know about rewilding, but you know, things change. I mean, one of the things that we struggle with here is a massive overpopulation of deer. And I don't think we're going to have wolves anytime soon. But it is interesting that the coyotes are kind of spreading in and pushing out the foxes a little bit. So, you know, things do change a little. But yeah, no, we don't have any mammoths yet. Although I did like the elephant this morning in the very first presentation.
Yes, a nice representation of plant blindness. Yes, how many species can you see there? Yeah, that was very good. And there was another question that was coming up. Yeah, no, it was a comment. It was, along with food, traditional herbal medicines are a good way of
yeah, absolutely,
of connecting botanic gardens with people. Yeah, just as we actually done very well at Bristol when I was there with the Chinese herbal medicine garden, which was a great success.
Yeah.
Are you doing anything with herbal medicines, native people's medicinal plants at Oak Spring?
We are growing some of those kinds of plants in the garden. I don't know that they're sort of necessarily, you know, traditionally cultivated, but they are plants that, you know, appear in homeopathic medicines and so on. So, I mean, we're growing all kinds of things, from, you know, hibiscus tea to, you know, various other plants that would be made into teas and so on. But I don't think we're doing so. I can't tie that back to Native American cultures at this point. We are, however, growing kind of old Appalachian varieties. These are mainly, of course, that were grown by Europeans, but maybe 300 years ago. So, for example, we're growing an old variety of sorghum that's been grown here in this region for 300 years. So we're trying to do a little on that, but we haven't really kind of connected with the Native American population. But that's something we certainly would like to do. And you know, the reason it's called a biocultural conservation farm is that it has these cultural dimensions to it, and these conservation dimensions as well.
Great. Well, we're getting some input here as well. I'm not sure how to exactly pronounce your Christian name, Jean-Charles Cabrera, who is from Canada, and she's saying, yes, medical herbalist and botanic garden manager from Canada here, just planted native medicines of British Columbia in the garden. Herbal medicine is a great gateway to cultural outreach.
Great,
So,
absolutely.
yeah, so good luck to you, Jean-Charles, and thank you for these comments. Definitely, certainly something to all think about with our gardens. And I think bringing things to a conclusion now, and picking up on the medicinal, the health benefits of plants, which of course were fundamental to why the Oxford Botanic Garden was created as a physic garden back in the 1600s. But what you were saying about the pandemic, Peter, it's almost turned the medicinal importance of old botanic gardens like ours, founded as physic gardens, full circle, in that botanic gardens and arboreta are, and other open spaces and parks have become so fundamentally important during the pandemic for people's physical and mental health and general well-being, that there's a whole new medicinal field really about the green medicine that plants and botanic gardens can give to people. So maybe that's where we can bring this whole meeting to a conclusion, and maybe can you give a last or penultimate comment on where you feel this is going in terms of gardens and open spaces in North America? I know Ned said, he gave some incredible statistics about Arnold Arboretum and the visitors in millions during the pandemic, but is this something that you
I'm sure
across the US?
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely right. I think people are desperate to get out into green spaces. The National Arboretum here in Washington, DC, their visitor numbers, particularly in the first quarter of this year, you know, which is not very attractive to January, February, March, not an attractive time. They were just overwhelmed with people wanting to get out and wanting to experience that. And but you know, we've known about this for kind of some time. There should be no surprise there. I think people have recognized that you know, green spaces are absolutely vital to people. And I certainly know that in Chicago, one of our previous mayors was hugely committed to this and spent a huge amount of money on trying to upgrade the kind of greening in the cities. And as I mentioned in the talk, these spaces are disproportionately important, because this is where most people live in the cities, and most people are going to get their first contact with nature in the cities. And so these spaces are incredibly important and often neglected, and they take many forms, from a park to a well-curated garden to a forest preserve, but all of these spaces are incredibly useful. But we also have to make people feel comfortable visiting those spaces too.
Thank you.